welcome to Devotionals with Dennis. So, today's verse is out of Esther in the 3rd chapter, verse 15. It's the last verse, and it reads, "The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed." And if you know the story, Haman had a grudge against Mordecai because Mordecai refused to be obeisant to him and to worship him, or to bow down before him. And rather than take out his frustrations on the one person he had a visual grudge against, he decided to be underhanded, sneaky, and he convinced King Ahasuerus, Darius is a better name for him, convinced King Darius to let him persecute the entire Jewish nation without saying it's the Jews. Now the Persian Empire was massive. There was an awful lot of people groups. It would have just been kind of a ho-hum thing. But this is a relevant story, and it's in the Bible, and it's an amazing story of God's grace and divine redemption and salvation. Because of course Queen Esther was Jewish. Mordecai was her cousin, and had raised her, and he managed to get word to her that there was this persecution about to happen, and the persecution was really serious. Haman had convinced the king to let him kill every member of the faith that refused to bow down before him. So they were going to go out and kill every Jew in the Persian Empire, and it's awful. He sent out notices, and the notices were almost a year in advance. It'd be like if you had a post on your door that said, "In 10 months, we're going to come kill you." And there's nowhere you can hide in the entire empire because we're going to kill every Jew in the entire empire. Pretty serious stuff. But the line I want to focus on is the very last one. But the city Shushan was perplexed. So you have this very one small element of just evil and bitter and grudge, and he's persecuting an entire people group, but no one else knows why. And that's wild. Even the king wasn't really super paying attention to it. It actually sounds like they had a drinking party and everything was great. They were merry and happy, and the king was just kind of oblivious to what was going on. But the city, this would be like if you saw that post about your neighbor, or it was on the evening news, starting tomorrow, or starting in 10 months, we're going to kill everyone whose last name starts with K. You're like, that's weird. Why? What purpose is there? What point is there? These are my neighbors, my friends. We talk together. We shop together. We're in this. This is our community. And the city was perplexed. And I was thinking about being perplexed. And there's so many things to be perplexed about, right? We'd be perplexed about the weather. Some days I live in New Mexico, and the weather is kind of it's bipolar as heck. We have a warm day and a cold day, and a warm day and a cold day, and you never know what's coming. But we get perplexed by more serious things. We get perplexed by the loss of jobs or loved ones. We get perplexed by we have you may have a neighbor who is violent or an alcoholic, and they're constantly in the throes of some violent behavior and action that you're perplexed. Like, why is it like this? Or on a bigger scale, in our country, we're perplexed. Why are our children and many people that we know and care about, why they've seemed to have slipped off into a level of paranoia that can't be explained following the lockdowns and the virus? Or at the political level, I'm personally perplexed why reasonable, rational people that I know are enthralled by a megalomaniac, for lack of a better word, and why they would be willing to forego their own morals and convictions to stay loyal to someone who is almost a criminal by a lot of accounts. And that's all politics. That's a weird story. But we're perplexed, and there's not answers. There's just not. There's not answers for us. God guides us and leads us. All things are in God's hands, but we don't always know what's going on, right? Like, you don't have the plan. If you have a copy of the plan, I'd like to see it, because I have some questions. But in Esther, the city was perplexed, and the Jews were just dismayed. They were in despair. Mordecai rent his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and just collapsed in the street in front of the king's palace. And it was like that all across the land. Like, the Jews knew they didn't have any recourse. And this is where the grace and the miracles kick in, because God knew what the recourse was. God knew what was going to happen. And by a series of events that were not connected to Haman at all and his persecution, Esther was able to find grace and come before the king, and without being underhanded herself, just being honest and decent and trusting that God was watching out for her, trusting that God did have good things in mind for the Jewish people. That this entire situation turned over, and by the end of Esther's narrative in the Bible, if you know it, the entire thing is reversed, and that leads right up into the restoration of Jerusalem, the return from the exile. So is these small, disconnected, confusing events that all of us, we sometimes look at it from other people, but then we look at our own lives and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And as we look at these things, they're small and they're not connected and they don't make sense, and in a lot of cases they can be painful and hurtful, and yet they're working to good. They're working for God's plan. They're gonna have an impact somewhere down the road, and it may not be in our lives or the lives of those around us, but somewhere these confusing, perplexing events are gonna have a purpose. God knows what it is, and that's the important part. So next time you're perplexed, remember the entire city of Shushan was perplexed, and that worked out okay. But just remember, God loves you. Read your Bibles. Thanks for watching. Take care.